Hello and welcome to the Keystone Kickoff Show. I'm Jim Galante along with T. Frank Carr. T. Frank, first question in this Penn State football world. Anything going on this week?
No, definitely not. Definitely not trying to deal with a loss to a top opponent, which was, and I don't use this word lightly, kind of embarrassing for Penn State. Nationally, personally, in the locker room, that was a bad loss. And then, of course, the fallout, everything else coming out after that. So, yeah, it's been a great time to sleep and have time to do other things in the midst of everything else that's going on.
T. Frank, before we get started, you and I were just chatting for a minute, and I was asking you about it being a surprise. And you talked about the timing surprising you a bit. James Franklin is so into the process, and doing this mid-season or late in the season even was unusual. However, I think he gave us a bit of a hint of why in his press conference with the very first question, where someone asked him about his post-game comment about not providing enough easy passes for the quarterback. Right. And the question essentially was, well, you're the head coach. Can't you just say, provide those easy passes? And here was just part of his response, and I'm looking off because I want to read this correctly. He said, a lot of times when we got to the games, either we did not call the games that way or we didn't execute the games the way we intended them to. Yes, those things were asked for. James at least makes it sound like there was really a difference of opinion between he and Mike Yurcich and how these games should be called.
Yeah, so firing your offensive coordinator with 2 games left and being a man down in all of those facets, they might be able to. I think James Franklin said they can elevate a somebody. I don't know if they can elevate an analyst to a position or something like that, but just generally, that is a something that he would not normally do. I followed up later because I wanted to know, like he talked about the game day, the calling of the game. But the game plan specifically, how did that get formed? Was the plan also a problem? Because that's another big thing coming into this game. Coming into these games, it felt like they didn't have a great plan that attacked the other team a lot of the time. So what was the process like in formulating the offensive game plan? And he said, he gave a very short answer, but the answer was yes. Like, the whole process needed to change. And so Jaywan Sider and Ty Howell are now tasked with creating a better game plan. So that's where I guess the jumping off to the kind of looking forward point is, does the offense improve and does it seem less stuck in the mud if James Franklin is saying, hey, I'm asking for these things and we're not getting them? And the way of formulating the plan, we didn't like that. So going forward, do we see a noticeable improvement in the efficiency of the offense and all the things that I think fans want to see and James Franklin wanted to see in the offense?
Okay, in this show, I want to dissect the offense and what was going on and why. But let's start right there with James Franklin's request for more easy passes for Drew Allar, which, by the way, I agree with that. But my question to you is, what exactly does that mean? How could they provide more easy passes for him?
So, first off, Jim, you're going to love this, throwing on first down. You've talked about this before. Yeah. It's not just throwing on first down. It's throwing when you don't have to be perfect. T. Frank's film room over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, I talked about this in the film room, and it kind of set up from the first half to the second half, where that game against Michigan, there were problems brewing despite the fact that Penn State was moving the football and they were in the football game. 36% of Drew Allar's passes came on either third down or fourth down. So the majority of his throws are coming when he has to either complete the pass or the offense is off the field. That's not great. That's not a great position to put confidence and ease in the mind of your quarterback. So that's one of the things, talking about what James Franklin wanted, more easy passes where it's like, you don't have to be perfect. If it's incomplete, it's 2nd and 10. You don't want to get behind the sticks, which is kind of the whole thing, right? So that there's dueling concepts here. And that's why I have been a little bit brain foggy about all of this stuff, because James Franklin is the ultimate front man for the plan, right? He's going to tell you what they want, how they want to execute it, and he's going to say, this is a good plan for us. We need to stay on schedule. We need to be efficient. We need to stay ahead of the sticks. And for Mike Yurcich, clearly that meant running the football. So you cannot get behind the sticks. You cannot have an incompletion. But you need to establish the pass so that the quarterback is not in a position where he feels the game pressure to be perfect. On top of that, specifically against Michigan, bad pressure up the middle, lots of pressure early, put the quarterback on the defensive. And he stayed that way for the rest of the game, and they couldn't pull him out of that. They couldn't put him in a situation to throw some easy passes to get his confidence. So that's part of that conversation. And then it kind of spirals from there of, this particular game versus other games they've played and the situations and what they were able to do offensively. There was never really a cohesive point to this offense. It was a collection of plays and ideas that sometimes worked based on what the defense gave you and kind of felt reactionary for a lot of the season. Reacting to what the defense is doing instead of having a plan of attack.
And you made reference to one of my pet peeves, which is throwing the ball on first down. And it's not so much just that you're throwing it on first down, it's you're throwing it when they're not necessarily expecting it. As you pointed out, 3rd and 10, yeah, they're probably expecting a pass. And not only are they expecting a pass, they realize it has to be completed, and it has to be completed, or at least after the catch, beyond 10 yards. So the defense is at a distinct advantage. Let's talk about some of the other position groups, and we'll get back to quarterback, T. Frank. But I want to hit some of the position groups and what they are doing, and are they helping the offense or not. One of the things that we keep hearing over and over again is about the wide receivers not getting separation. And I always have the question, if the wide receivers aren't capable of getting separation on their own, can the offense scheme them open?
Well, what do you think a flea flicker is? What do you think a wide receiver pass is? That's the biggest problem. Is the plan of attack to get the receivers open was not to create conflict for the defense and put players in positions outside of, I think, traditional, maybe high-low in a zone read for the quarterback to throw the ball into the wherever the defender isn't sort of situations. There weren't schemed up plays to take advantage of the defensive rules. It was, we need to get a receiver open, so let's do a trick play. And just going back to the Michigan game, because I have that in my brain locked in, the one thing you knew about this Michigan secondary based on the way they played and everything on film was, even against tough opponents, which they didn't have many, they were frosty. They always were locked in on their assignment. They did not make mental busts. So if you're expecting a halfback toss back, the flea flicker to work, you are going, you're I don't want to say you're saying you didn't watch the film, because they did, but you're not acknowledging what you saw. You're hoping. And I think that's kind of what it comes down to, is like with the receiver group, they were kind of hoping that they could just trick players into getting open. And that's very frustrating. That's a very frustrating way to run your offense. And there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. Let's talk about the receivers specifically in this last game. Did Dante Cephas take a step from that Maryland game where everything worked for him? It seems like when things are complex, this offense fails. And when teams are running zones or running one look and then showing another post snap, nobody's on the same page. The receivers were not locked in against Michigan. There's multiple examples if you go through the film. The first 3rd down, it's a full second before Keandre Lambert-Smith moves off the line of scrimmage. He's the primary target, and he's standing there. He's looking at the football. There's no reason a receiver should ever be laid off the snap. And by the time he gets into his route, playing patty cake with the defensive back, the ball is about to hit him in the helmet. Dante Cephas on a couple of routes, not running a route because he's on the backside of the play, and then the obvious times that he doesn't know where he's supposed to be. So are these guys locked in? Are they playing to the level of their ability, or are they playing to the level of their focus? And their focus goes in and out each week. So this offense does not have, even we talk about the number one receivers, the guys that are locked in, they are not consistent football players. And then you lose Trey Wallace, and suddenly you're relying on guys that are wildly inconsistent. So Drew Allar, from a support structure of making sure the quarterback is confident, the offensive line isn't blocking well to start the game. And early on, first drive of the game, he has an indication that his receivers aren't locked in either. So the lack of trust in the offense and everything around him, I don't blame him for it. You want to see your quarterback be more mentally resilient than he was in that game, because he was not mentally resilient despite all those things. It took until, the bleep hit the fan when you're down 2 scores, and then he started to just, fine, I'm going to do it on my own, basically, and start ripping the ball into tight windows, and had some really good throws that resulted in incompletions, because that's how that day was going. So it's on a player level, but also the players are not getting easy looks and easy designs from the offense.
When you say things to me like Cephas not running perhaps the right route, Lambert Smith slow getting off the snap, at what point is that not still coaching? If there's not discipline and the players doing what they're supposed to be doing, T. Frank.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I watch them coach these guys on Wednesdays. It's a small window into practice, right? And some of the situations that come up routinely in the game, I see the implication of what they're doing in practice and how it's supposed to be applied on film. So some of this stuff, it's not like there isn't evidence that they're being coached. It's just not being received. So then you have to have the hard decision of, does somebody need to not be on the football field? And then you go to, who do you trust to put on there in replacement of that? But absolutely, this offense is inconsistent. The blocking, as good as the offensive line has been at times this year, and there were moments in this game where they were good, it's wildly inconsistent. The entire offense, the nature of it, the real personality of Penn State's offense is inconsistency. And that goes back to coaching, and the guy who's responsible, the CEO of the offense, he took responsibility for that by losing his job on Sunday.
Very good, T. Frank. That's going to be it for quarter one. But as you might expect, there's still a lot more questions to ask. And who better to give us those answers than T. Frank? Stay tuned for more.
Hey, it's T. Frank. Happy holidays. And you can tell it's the holidays because I have my holiday pumpkin up. Covers it all. Fall, Thanksgiving, etc. If you're like me, the holidays don't mean things get easier. It just means people are coming over to your house now so they can see the mess that you've been sitting in. And the number one way for me to be on top of my game is to sleep. Like, that's the main thing you want to do, is live your life the way your body is supposed to live. And for me, that's hard because, full transparency, at this point in the season, typically I have some sort of nerve pain going on in my neck, my shoulder, my elbow, something from all of the sitting here and watching film and doing all the doodads I do. So to help me stay asleep at night and to sleep through some of those issues, I use RogueShop.com. I use their edibles to help fall asleep and stay asleep. They're non-habit forming and they're great to use. So if you want to use something like this, maybe you have chronic pain, maybe you have some other issues that you need to manage, they have CBD and a bunch of other great products over at RogueShop.com that can help you live a more healthy, fulfilling life by dealing with some of these chronic issues. They know all the things to help you through whatever you have. I know what I know. I know what I use. But Shar over at RogueShop.com, she's going to help you out. So use the promo code, by the way. Use the promo code BWI for 10% off your purchase at RogueShop.com. And that way, you can get through the holiday season and actually fall asleep or whatever it is for you. RogueShop.com. Thanks for being a partner here on the BWI live show.
Hello and welcome back to the Keystone Kickoff Show. It's quarter number 2. He's T. Frank. I'm Jim. We're talking all things Penn State football, not just the Michigan game, not just letting go of the offensive coordinator, but everything that happened to kind of lead up to this. And T. Frank, I was asking you about a play in the Michigan game where Penn State was inside the Michigan 5, and they ran the fade pass to Dante Cephas.
Yeah.
My gut reaction, initial reaction to it is they did this worked the week before against Maryland, so
Yeah.
it's certainly going to work again, right? And
you're picking the wrong
you had
play.
more thoughts on that.
Yeah, you're picking the wrong play. The one that I had that feeling about was the "Hey, look at Nick" play, where he runs the jet sweep, and everyone's supposed to follow him. And again, like I said in the first segment, Michigan doesn't bust coverage. They're not going to make mental mistakes. You're not forcing them to cover that guy because they've seen it on film, and you've got to have a better plan than the thing that we did against Indiana. The play you're referencing, it's not going to make you feel better that I think Nick Singleton, if he had the ball on that play, would have scored a walk-in touchdown. But it's an RPO. So it's the quarterback's decision on that play whether or not to give the ball to the running back or to pull the ball and throw. And based on the field position and the alignment of the defense, it was a one-on-one. And yeah, it had worked previously. Allar, in a rare moment of like, I'm going to be the quarterback, throws the ball into that window and tries to get the touchdown there. And it was a fine throw, actually. Like, that's a low percentage throw. They almost got it. He almost secured the pass. Almost doesn't matter here on Wednesday after you fired your offense coordinator and you didn't score a touchdown there, which led to a whole cascade of issues, not getting points early that then you have to chase points late, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it does speak to the nature, I think, sometimes of the problem in this offense, which is it can be reactionary instead of choosing to dictate the terms to the defense.
Well, in that, and I want to bring up an example, and this is what gets frustrating as a fan. And I thought Penn State's defense played really well. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple breakdowns on 3rd and long. And it was, interestingly enough, Penn State always wants to get you into that 3rd and long, and they could run their 7-man front. It's been successful. And Michigan ended up running the ball multiple times when they faced that, and they converted on 3rd down. That to me seemed like that was the Michigan coaching staff out coaching the Penn State coaching staff because they knew what was coming from Penn State. It doesn't feel like we ever say that about the Penn State offense. Look, here they took advantage of the defense because they scouted them and knew what was coming.
So it's hard to know a couple of things here, right? The first thing is the play calls not called. And James Franklin is saying now that there's a different plan than what we got with the execution of the plan on Saturday. And, when I asked him the process of the plan versus the execution, he said, yes, all of it. But he really leaned into especially the execution of it was not up to our standards. So here's an example of something I can give you of how that process might be of what he's talking about. There's a play that's called at the line of scrimmage, and then you look at the defense based on your formation and the alignment of everybody on the field, plus what you have called and what you see pre-snap from the defense, the coverage shell, the front, etc. So then there's the check with me on the sideline, which comes down from the play caller who says, okay, based on that, we're going to run this play. And if you want to know why they ran on 1st down every single play, Jim, I'm going to lean in here to the camera. It's because Michigan told them to. Michigan, in a game where they play generally cover 3 so far this season, they started with a 2-high coverage shell, meaning there's a light box, there's only 6 players in the box. And that screams run the football. And again, going back to what is this offense tasked with? Efficiency. Don't you dare lose it for the defense. Stay on schedule. Make sure that you convert on 3rd down. Make it 3rd and manageable so you can run or pass in those situations. So a 1st down run for 5 yards is a win for the offense. And Penn State got high on their own supply of 5-yard 1st down runs because they didn't establish the pass. They didn't get the quarterback in rhythm to give him some of that love of, hey, here's a feel-good play for 5 yards, making you feel like you're part of the offense. So Michigan very much goaded Penn State into running the football all the time, taking 5 yards, and delaying the possibility of getting your passing game going. And that is that right there is in a certain way being outcoached. Penn State did this to Ohio State in 2022. They had an explosive offense, Marvin Harrison Jr., and they just gave Ohio State a lot of good running looks. That year, Ohio State wanted to hashtag establish the run, which is a myth. But they wanted to be better at running the football. So Penn State gave them too high looks and then flooded the box after the snap, expecting the run, and then only late in the game did Ohio State have any success running the football. Penn State had success running into good looks and bad looks on first down, but it was kind of fool's gold. And that's an area of, we want to get the quarterback involved, but we're going to take the priority of everything else to give the offense, to not establish balance in the offense.
So it's interesting that the way you phrase that Michigan was dictating this. They were goading. They said, I'm going to give you a look and force you to run the ball on first down. On the surface, T. Frank, if they're goading you into that and you are getting 5 yards on first down running the ball and consistently doing that, is there a problem with that? Should there be a problem with that? 2nd and 5 doesn't sound so bad.
Yeah, and that's on the surface level. Like when I'm going through the first half and I'm looking at the film, I'm saying this is fine. There's some good plays where again, I say it on the film room, it's not sexy to be defending Mike Yurcich right now, but there's some plays that are touchdowns or that are explosive plays that the offensive line doesn't consistently block for the passing play or the run play. One key block goes wrong and the play is blown up. But the concept and the idea there was good. It then becomes, what happens on 2nd and 3rd down and how do you respond in those situations? And Penn State and Mike Yurcich apparently were fixated on staying on schedule. And, when it comes to the passing game, this is another part of the stuff that I don't really know how to express. And I've been frustrated in trying to work it out in my mind. And I've been talking my wife's ear off about what is the thing that's wrong with this offense? And the part that I think it is, there is no link between the standard passing game and the run game. So the run game has option augmentations on it where the quarterback can keep the ball and throw it. He can throw the RPO, but there's no cohesion between what the passing game does and what the running game does to put players in conflict based on what you've already called. There's no sequencing of plays this year. It's a collection of ideas. The only thing that I know based on what I've seen is Mike Yurcich wanted to get back to what he was, which was a zone running offense. But there are no passing plays based off of that I can think of off the top of my head, or games where he's called plays based off of that. The passing game has succeeded or failed based on, do we know what's coming and is it man coverage? The Maryland game, they knew what was coming. They got cover 0, they beat it. Drew Allar has been good the last couple of weeks at beating cover 0. But when it comes to everything else in the passing game, cover 4 is not that hard to beat. It's not easy to throw deep into, but there are ways to defeat every zone coverage. And it felt like Penn State went to the same well too often, and teams predicted that. And there was nothing to play off of what they had already been doing in the passing game. The passing game was static and it didn't evolve. It didn't turn into something that you could feel like it was, schematically dangerous. Like you said, scheming guys open. There was some of that, but at the same time, it didn't fit within the confines of making it easy. They were hard throws. If you're able to get them, they're explosive plays, but they're hard throws to make. And there wasn't a lot of stuff in the offense that was just against the zone. Find this soft spot in the zone, sticks route, throw it, completion, first down. And again, I am starting to climb the ladder of way outside my comfort zone of things that should be called. And that's how this process always goes. But I'm trying to come up with a good answer for what should have been, because obviously what did happen and what we did see was frustratingly inept.
Well, as a casual fan, I'll call myself, and that's in comparison to you. You do the film study in a way that I never have or never probably will or would never even understand it. But as a fan watching some of this, T. Frank, I feel like things are so predictable. Another one of Jim's pet peeves. You're running a read option where the option is quarterback, I either hand it off to the running back or I potentially keep it myself, or I could also pass off of that. How many times has Drew Allar actually exercised the option where he could pull the ball out and run it? At least, so if you see that play coming on defense, he's giving it to the running back. He's not keeping it himself. So the whole concept, I think, doesn't work. The other one that I saw in the Michigan game was, I believe it's on 3rd and short. They successfully ran a quarterback draw. And the next time I see the same formation, empty backfield, I'm in the press box going, boy, that looks like quarterback draw to me.
They motioned in the tight end, and everyone saw it coming. The funny thing is, Jim, is that the second one actually worked. He walked for a first down, but then he fumbled the football. And that's kind of the bad luck, but also kind of the nature of this team.
There was another one where it was unsuccessful because I know I was looking for it and it got blown up, T. Frank. So, but that's what I'm talking about, feeling it's predictable, and I don't feel it's like they're running too much or throwing too much, but it's just they're predictable at what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, and that kind of goes back to, and this is where I have a hard time of knowing where Mike Yurcich is ultimately responsible for this, right? For all of the problems that are on the offense from the position coaches upward. But it's not just on him. The players across the board are not consistent at their job. Is that because they're not clear on what they're supposed to be doing? If that's the case and they're running the same plays, that's a problem. Like, that's a problem in communication and teaching, for sure. But when it comes back to, James Franklin talked about in the setup of this game, referencing the Iowa game, and his learning moment for the offense was, don't go away from the good plays that are working. Make sure that you make them beat you before you move on to a new concept. So if you're running the same plays over and over and over again, and the coach has said previously, we want to run the good plays until they stop them, is that an edict from James Franklin, and Mike Yurcich is executing that? Like, this is where I get, like, this is the hard part for me, is who's making those decisions? Who is that part on? And I don't have a good answer. I don't have an answer at all for you on that, because that's the point. We don't know.
All right, T. Frank, that's it for quarter 2. Quarter 3, we got your questions. We're going to ask T. Frank. Hello and welcome back to the Keystone Kickoff Show. It's quarter number 3. That means it's time to ask T. Frank. This is where we take your questions for T. Frank. He gives us incredible answers. And at the end of the segment, we'll pick out the best question. Actually, it's T. Frank who picks it out. And they will win a prize pack from the 409tailgateclub.com, the place to go for all your barbecue rubs and sauces and even Bloody Mary mix. Go to 409tailgateclub.com. And if you want to ask a question for T. Frank, very simple. Just download our app, Keystone Sports. There's a button there where you can either ask T. Frank or ask Andy a question. All right. T. Frank, first question comes from Mike from Harrisburg, who said, players are paid now, so I think automatically blaming the coach should be a thing of the past. Okay, fine. But here's this question. Mike says, if you had to pick between the Penn State players and the Michigan players with any fantasy coaching team assigned for the season, who would you pick? Let's put it this way. I think he's asking talent-wise, pure talent-wise.
Yeah.
You pick Michigan's roster or Penn State's roster?
If I could do a fantasy draft and do a snake draft and pick from both squads, I would do that, because they're flawed. Let's not get this twisted. The reason Michigan played the way they did on Saturday is because they could not block Chop Robinson in the passing game. It was a disaster. So they decided, if you have to bring 7 offensive linemen on the field to run the football, that is not a decision you're making because you have an advantage. If Michigan was the Michigan we were talking about last year, the year before, they'd be running the football with 5 offensive linemen and gashing Penn State. Penn State was playing really well against the run. So offensive line-wise, like, other than the positions they were put in, the offensive line, they deferred putting their right tackle into any passing situations. they were able to do that because the Penn State offense was so incompetent. You can't run the ball 30 times in the second half and win if the opposing offense has the ability to score points. So I'm taking the Penn State defense. I'm taking most of the Penn State offensive line. I'd probably take the Michigan wide receivers, even though I don't think that Roman Wilson is individually great. And the running backs, I think, are comparable. So it's not a dominant Michigan is a better team on paper. It is not dominant that Michigan is a better, more elite team. Penn State's offense is sick, and they need to find a way to fix it. So I think based on the results, I would take the Michigan. No, I'm going to take the Penn State offense. I'm just going to say it. Like, if the receivers and everything was more cohesive and coherent, they have the talent to be better than they are, but they're not. And that's the problem.
T. Frank, you talked about the players and which group you would take. You know what I heard? This Penn State coaching staff was completely outcoached. That's what I'm hearing you say. You didn't use those words, but that's what I'm hearing you say.
That's fair. Yeah, and they fired one of them, so I guess, yeah, there's more evidence that is the fact.
All right, let's move on. Let's go to Steve in Colorado Springs, Colorado, who says, T. Frank and Jim, love your analysis. Well, thank you, Steve. I'm getting sick and tired of all the Franklin bashing out there simply because he struggles against Michigan and Ohio State. I'm going to short circuit his whole analysis where he goes through it and essentially says most of the time Penn State has been the underdog against those groups. So he's saying his conclusion is, this tells me Franklin's doing what he's expected to do, but not much more. What am I missing?
Right.
Why is everyone so critical of him for not having more upset wins?
Because he is genuinely, this year is the problem. This is the year I've gotten on the bandwagon of this is a Penn State problem, because in previous years they have been with a clear disadvantage in certain critical situations. You go back to the Ohio State defense last year in 2022, and Penn State does not have a depth tackle to step in for an injured Caden Wallace. And suddenly, one guy can dominate the game. JT Tuilamoleau can dominate the game, and Penn State has a hard time. They're scheming around that. They're scheming around a talent hole. They don't have an offensive line in 2021. They don't have the talent there. So the recruiting is hurting the implementation of the plan. Going back to some of the other things with Mike Yurcich is like, I don't know if we ever saw what his plan of attack was, because what his plan previously was very different than what he saw here at Penn State. We saw part of the vertical passing game and the screen game in 21. We saw part of the run game in 23, and that kind of met in the middle in 22, but we never saw like a cohesive offense from him through any point, I feel like, in his time at Penn State. So this year, Penn State had what I just said in Mike's question. Penn State had comparable talent to Michigan. And, that's going to, it's always frustrating. Like, you're going to be called a homer for saying that, because I cover Penn State and I do this job covering one team. And I'm saying that even though they lost, they were the more talented team. And I think generally, just from a assessment of the strengths and weaknesses of both squads, I think that's true. So Penn State had the ability to win these games. Go back to the game against Ohio State. The defense played well enough to win. The offense played so poorly that they took Kyle McCord and they gave him enough chances to throw the ball to Marvin Harrison Jr. and put the defense out there in a position to fail routinely. But Penn State's offensive talent is better. The offensive line, the running game with a cohesive plan, could set up the passing game better than it did. We were talking about this in the break, and I was trying to find, it feels like play action was severely underutilized in this offense. And part of it is the play action passing was 7 people blocking, 2 people running routes. And then check the ball down if you don't get that. And that needed to evolve. The same play that they ran that should have been a touchdown, admittedly, against Michigan, is the same play that they ran the first passing play of the year against West Virginia. There was no playing off of that. There's no augmentation. There's no cohesive development. So Penn State's players were good enough. but the offense wasn't good enough despite that.
Again, I'll reiterate, T. Frank, I don't think that's an indication that you're a homer. My interpretation of what you're saying is the coaches didn't do the job. It's pretty simple. And to also answer, it was Steve, the even if you statistical analysis, if you're only supposed to have a 33% chance of winning, but you play that team 10 times and you win only once, that's still a disappointment, even if you were the underdog in every game. You should have won at least a handful of those games, and that hasn't happened. And as you put it, T. Frank, this is the first year that I think we all felt it was at least comparable talent, and you had to at least win one of those two games, and they didn't. Let's go to Vic and Lansdale, and this was the question I referenced earlier. Vic says, T. Frank, I hear different fans saying they need to run the ball more. Others saying, let Allar throw the ball more. Obviously, they can't both be right. But what is it we're seeing? Is it the sequence? Is it when they call those different options, run versus passing the ball? Help us out here.
Yeah, this is the part where I kind of shrug my shoulders and say, in the postgame show, BWI Live postgame show, I said, obviously, this plan was bad. You set your quarterback up where I want to say half of his attempts were in the third and fourth quarter when you were down a score and then two scores. You make him throw most of his passes on third and fourth down. That is not setting your players up for success. So the sequencing of the plays in that perspective is the problem. What are they supposed to do? I'm going to go make mac and cheese because I'm not an offensive coordinator. Like fundamentally, like how are they supposed to do it? I can give you some ideas, and I've tried to kind of word salad my way through this over the last couple of days, but I don't know. Like, that's where T. Frank's powers, that's the end of the road for me. Like I do try, by the way, to understand these things and learn in the off season and get deeper into this stuff. But that's the deepest part where you're game planning and creating these options and creating these passing concepts and putting them into effect. That is straight up offensive coordinating. So that's a level to get to. I'll say that the sequencing of the plays and just repeating what James Franklin said, getting your quarterback in a flow and a confidence has not been anything they've been able to do this year. But one thing we do have to acknowledge in all of this stuff going back to Penn State has the talent. The receivers have proven this year they are not up to snuff. They are not good enough. They don't have a number one receiver. They don't have a number two receiver because he's injured. And the number three receiver we knew coming in they didn't have. And they haven't been able to utilize their tight ends effectively in the passing game to make them a consistent threat where you're leaning on those guys. That's, I think, if we want to point to one thing this year, is they haven't been able to work around not having, using the tight ends as well as they possibly can to make you wrong no matter what with their 12 personnel. And part of that is the tight ends. Part of that is the scheming. Part of that is the receivers not taking any heat off anybody.
T. Frank, you mentioned the play action pass as part of this, that you're not an offensive coordinator. What I will say, and I think you're right, is play action pass is saying, I believe the defense is looking for us to run the ball, and I'm going to fool them by throwing the ball. Yeah. And that's coaching to pick and choose when you see that. All right.
So can I just real quick on that point, and then we'll get to the next question. I guess the point of the play action is they used it to take deep shots, and Allar's average depth of target was the lowest among Big Ten starting quarterbacks. So they didn't use play action to suck the linebackers into the line of scrimmage and then throw over their heads, which a lot of teams do. They didn't use it as an intermediate effective passing attack. They tried to use it for shot plays. And again, they didn't evolve it. That wasn't working all year. It worked a couple of times. They needed to formulate a different plan of how to use play action, and it didn't work.
Okay, let's sneak in. Andrew from San Marcos, California, said, is it better to be a head coach at a MAC school, let's say Akron, or a coordinator at a high-profile program, let's say Penn State? I'm guessing that a Penn State coordinator is paid more.
I don't know.
I wonder who's
and
talking
what
about.
What is the value of your autonomy? What is the value of your ability to dictate things and be your own man and be your own leader? It's not just about the money. Joe Moorhead is not a guy that having met him, having been around him, I don't think money's the issue. He wanted to be a head coach, and he's a head coach at Akron. He was a head coach at Mississippi State. I don't know if that comes down to, does he want to chase success at the highest level more than he wants to determine his own future by being a head coach, by being the leader, the man in charge, and wanting to do things his way. He's got enough money that I don't think money is going to be the determining factor. It's going to be what he wants out of his career.
All right, that is it for quarter 3. Stick around. Quarter 4, we're going to name our winner. And welcome back to the Keystone Kickoff Show. It's quarter number 4. He's T. Frank. I'm Jim. We just wrapped up Ask T. Frank. All that's left to do with that, T. Frank, is name a winner. Who's it going to be?
Yeah, that we're going to go to Vic and Lansdale, I think is who we're going with. We're going to go with Vic this week for sure.
He kind of summed up things in talking about the fan reaction, and it's like, is it running? Is it passing? Do more of this, more of that. I think that shows the confusing nature of what's going on with this offense. And let's stay down that offensive side path and what's going on. We talked a lot about the passing game. T. Frank, I want to ask you a bit about the running game. And here's a disconcerting statistic. Looking at yards per carry for each of Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton. Interestingly enough, for Kaytron Allen, he went from 5.2 yards a carry in 22. This year, he's at 4.9 yards per carry. Not a huge difference. Nick Singleton went from 6.8 yards a carry to 3.9 yards a carry this year. Yeah. What is going on with that? Is it the offensive line? Is it Nick Singleton? Is it the play calling? There's
it's explosive runs.
Explanation.
It's explosive runs. That's the difference. Nick is a good running back, and I want to give him credit for running through contact and finishing runs and getting the 100% of the available yards against Michigan. He did his job there. There are some plays where Nick is not. He's doing the right thing. He's following his blocking from a technical perspective, but not seeing the second level of understanding in the play of, if I cut here, I'm faster and I can get explosive plays. So the confidence to do that. Also this year, the blocking is it's hard to say it's better. There are elements I like about it that are more consistent. I feel like they are a little more consistent this year in getting some of those 4 to 5 yard runs that are just clean running lanes for the running back. But they don't have the pure airport runway for him to just run the football 70 yards, beat an angle with speed, and get a touchdown. We talked about Brenton Strange, Juice Scruggs missing some key players that played with a level of consistency. Maybe not the high end. I think Hunter Norzad has the ability to do some really dynamic things in the run game with his athleticism, his explosiveness, and his sometimes his violence at contact. But he is not as consistent as Juice Scruggs. So some of these things are not lining up properly to get Nick a blocking scheme to get him 70 yards. And with Kaytron, it's kind of more of the same, where he is just churning out through the mud, through bad run plays, making guys miss, popping in and out of holes, and then getting run down by a 350-pound nose tackle instead of being able to break it for a touchdown. So it's a little bit of Kaytron fits any situation, and Nick is evolving into a guy that you're hoping fits any situation and then can take it to the next level as a junior running back. But the special part of his game has not evolved this year, and that's 100% of what's going on with his yards per carry and his production this year. He's actually, I think, been better as a pure running back than he was last year, but as a pure athlete, it's not translating the same way.
I do want to ask you about one running play that we saw in the Michigan game, and that's the play where Kaytron Allen had the long run. Yep. That running play looked very different than most of the running plays, not just because it succeeded for over 30 yards, but it looked like a different style of run. and they were able to get Katron Allen on the outside. Am I just being that silly fan who says, oh, why aren't they getting him on the edge more often?
So the problem is I don't remember which specific run this is, so I don't know whether it's one of two blocking schemes. One of them is, and I'll just describe both of them, and I don't remember which one resulted in the big play. I'm sorry. One of them was they use inside zone with a lead blocker, which changes things up front and allows the blocking up front to have easier angles to the second level. Katron Allen then breaks a play, breaks a tackle, and gets into the open field. I think that one went for 9. There was another play where they ran a pin and pull, and they got their athletes, Hunter Norzad, JB Nelson, into space, but they were able to do that because, one, they were running at a safety who was probably 190 pounds, and 2, Theo Johnson got the pin block. They've been trying to do that this year more often, is use that pin and pull scheme, but their tight ends can't get that critical block. They fundamentally can't block the pin in the pin and pull, and in this game they did, and that's what I'm saying is they succeeded. Their running schemes succeeded at times against Michigan, and they led to explosive plays, or they led to 5-6 yards on first down. So it wasn't all terrible. It wasn't the worst game plan you've ever seen, but it wasn't good enough because of the things we talked about earlier in the game. And that is for Katron Allen, when he gets into that situation, Michigan and the mystique of them being so great against the run, I think Penn State poked some holes in that. Of Penn State ran the ball on this team. They were the more physical team on the line of scrimmage on both sides, and they still lost. That is, I think, the troubling thing, and why Mike Yurcich is fired, is because you controlled that game on the defensive side outside of some missed blocks and assignments. But you controlled the Michigan offensive line, and the offensive line controlled the run game, but they couldn't mount any sort of passing attack that resembled a threat in either of the big games they played this year.
Okay, T. Frank, we've been looking at the past and how we ended up at this point where we're going to see a new offensive coordinator, or I should say plural, offensive coordinators. I know you hate when I do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to put that offensive coordinator hat on you, okay?
Yeah.
Now, you're taking over as new offensive coordinator. What are the things that you want to do with this offense? Or at the very least, what would you like to see from this group?
More called passing plays, not just on first down, but more called passing plays that don't involve take the decision out of the quarterback's hands on the option. And I'm not just talking about the read option and et cetera, about Drew Allar not keeping the football. I'm talking about option plays. I think that they can be valuable if the quarterback is ready and willing to use them. More straight called passing plays and more usage of the tight ends over the middle of the football field to disrupt zones. They need to do some more, as James Franklin said, easy rhythm throws to get the quarterback involved. Everything was to the outside, and everything was down the football field for shot plays. Put some things in the offense. Just think about how many times Pat Freiermuth ran 6 yards, turned around, and caught the football. I mean, from a basic sense, just more of that. Just more of spread it out, let the quarterback read the zones, and pick his favorite player in that concept. And then from there, play off the running game a little bit better in terms of the like I've said, the cohesiveness between the run game and the pass game. If you can blend the two and make them look the same and have play action be meaningful instead of just a fake mesh point or a fake play action or something like that, have it be a real and established part of we're drawing the linebackers and the safeties down so that we can pop the ball over their head, instead of we're faking the mesh point so that we can bring people in and the safeties. I don't even know, like getting down a rabbit hole where I don't have an end point. So some simpler things to give the quarterback confidence, and then you can fold in your option plays. And I think that's kind of the point James Franklin is making, is give the quarterback something he can digest instead of throwing at him 3 or 4 options and then a complex passing play where he needs to remember that he needs to get to the backside dig if it's a 4-high defense and they play hard on a hard edge on that boundary side and all of these different checklists. And it's like, just let him throw the football a couple of times.
You mentioned something there in your answer about using the middle of the field. again, as a fan just watching the games, it feels like they're not using the middle of the field. First of all, is that accurate? Second of
Mm-hmm.
all, is it a case where Drew Allar has just chosen not to do that? He has options and chooses not to throw it there. Or is it the play calling, just they're not calling plays to go there?
It's a little of column A and a little of column B. I wrote about this earlier this year, where 11% of Drew Allar's passes targeted the middle of the field plus 10 yards. So not just the explosive plays down the field, but also some of those intermediate passes of 10 yards to 15 yards. That was a void in the Penn State passing attack. Against certain teams, they evolved that. Against Indiana and Maryland, who allowed them to get in the middle of the field, that happened. Against Michigan, who is showing different coverages, they didn't attack the middle of the field as much. Again, there are certain routes, but Penn State loves their crossing routes, and sometimes those don't work against zones. The quarterback has to anticipate and throw into the window or the second window, and Allar, when he's not confident, isn't doing those things. He does them late in games when he has to, when you have Caden Saunders coming over the middle and it's open, and you hit him, but it's behind him. At that point, you have not established the confidence of the quarterback. Hashtag establish the pass. Establish the pass, excuse me, not establish. And you haven't given him the ability to unlock his abilities. And that's, I'm kind of a broken record here. That's what I'm focused on because that's what I saw in this past game. And that's a huge part of using the middle of the football field in other ways than just screens. That's another thing is I feel like when they use the short middle of the field under 10 yards, it's screens and things that don't just get you 5 yards, 6 yards from a passing perspective. Think about the completions that J.J. McCarthy made, where against zone, he's throwing the football to his tight end out on the out away from the zone coverage, beating a linebacker with the ball in a simple read. There's not a lot of simple reads here where they're attacking the underneath zones. It's either short, deep, or it's run the football.
Let's finish up with Drew Allar.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that's got to be disconcerting for him, changing offensive coordinators and quarterback coach. A lot of different voices are now going to be in his ear.
Mm-hmm.
What could this coaching staff do specifically for him and his confidence going forward?
Get an offensive coordinator that has the ability to translate the information to the quarterback in a way that he feels comfortable. And Jim, I don't know, because what is Drew Allar's responsibility in his own confidence? And this is the problem I come back to, is I know he can read a defense. I know he knows the offense cold. I know he's smart enough. I've seen his eyes be good to get to all the parts of the field. So that's the thing I want to see from the next offensive coordinator is make it so he doesn't have to do full field progression reads and he can get to his first read more often. Scheme open the first read more often. Make it a little bit easier and less predictable. And then secondarily, have things in the playbook where he's able to read the defense and feel he has the confidence to get beyond that to the second progression more consistently.
Very good, T. Frank. That's it. We're out of time. Thank you all for listening. Make sure you join us next time on the Keystone Kickoff Show.